So you guys, my name is Mo. I'm the Internal Medicine Residency Program Director at the Boise Internal Medicine Residency. We are UW kids. I am an E95, which when I talk to medical students makes them fall off of their chair and they do some math and they're like, was I born by then? I can't quite remember, those sorts of things. And I was privileged to be able to work at UWMC for a while before my wife said, we're going back to Boise. And by we, I mean, that includes you. And so we're all going back. So I'm out here, I work with Bill and Liz, and we have a really pretty good time. So Shom asked me to talk a bit about how to run an effective meeting. I want to see if we can agree on some guidelines for the discussion though, before we get going. One is, I'm happy with however you guys want to do this. So if you want your videos to stay on, that's better for me. I'm kind of a people person. I like looking at you guys. I like to see what you're doing and reacting to. But if you need to shut your video off, that's fine. If you need to eat or drink or stand up or move around, I think that's all okay. I think symbols are a little bit off color and we might kind of call you on that, but otherwise do what you need to do. I will try to monitor the chat. And as I say that, I realized that I had shut the chat off. Tom's an E81. Thanks, Tom. Leslie's an E87. Oh, see, there we go. We're all in this. Great. We're colleagues, friends. Here we go. So I will try to monitor the chat. I'm a little bit of a 4-year-old in a 50-year-old woman's body, so I have a little bit of trouble with this. So if you guys notice something in the chat that a colleague has mentioned that I have overlooked, please feel free to unmute and bring that up. Also, we're a small group. I welcome you just to unmute and chat as we go. I think it will be best if we try to do one person talking at a time, but we'll see how it goes. I'm hoping there'll be some ideas that people throw out that'll be new to some of us, and we'll say, and I might say, gosh, that sounds like a horrible idea. But what I'd like us to do is say, how could that be a good idea? So let's sort of be open to other people's ideas, assume positive intent, turn to wonder, those sorts of things. And then the concept of step up. So if there's silence and you have something to say, please fill in that space. Silence is okay, we can wait. And if you find that you've been talking a bunch, maybe you step back a little bit to give other people a bit of time. These are ground rules from my colleague here in Boise, Andrea Christopher, who many of you know. So I've swiped these from her. Are these ground rules we think we can agree to? Seems good. Okay, I guess the other one I'll throw in that I didn't put on the slide is that if we find that somebody's taking us way off track, we might just say, maybe we're getting a little bit off track and kind of pull ourselves back to the original topic. Hi, James. All righty. Okay, so we've agreed to some guidelines. See if I can figure out how to make these work. All right, so we're going to talk about how to run an effective meeting, and I think it's in 3 big buckets. You guys, there's the work that's done before the meeting, it's the actual meeting itself, and that's the work after the meeting. This is not rocket science, but let's start with the pre-work. And I think, frankly, that's where the heavy lifting goes, is both before and after the meeting. The meeting itself is, in my mind, the fun part, because you actually get to see people, or at least pretend you can see them, because you can't actually touch them nowadays. So question number 1, do we really need a meeting? Right? We've all been in meetings. We're like, why are we having these meetings? So somebody give me an idea. Let's get going. Let's brainstorm. When do you really need a meeting? What is a meeting good for?
If you have to decide action or vote on something, I mean, either formal or, just functional, that's a good one.
Yes, there's a discussion and a decision has to be made. Love it, Bill. That sounds like a meeting. Great. Other good reasons to have a meeting?
Build consensus.
Yes, fantastic. Yes, I think there's nuance there, right, John, that you're suggesting, right? Bill's meeting might be one where truly the decision hasn't been made yet. And there really is a groupthink or a little bit of brainstorming to be done. Getting consensus might be a little bit more where the decision's kind of made and you kind of need to wrap people around. In my mind, those are both meetings that save about 7,000 emails. We can get done in 30 minutes would have taken 7 weeks in email. Okay, other good reasons for a meeting?
A little bit related to those two, when we can be smarter together with the right people in the room and come to a better decision.
Yes, I love that, Tom. I don't think there's been anything going on, especially that you've had to make decisions, like hard decisions about really tough things and short time frames.
Yeah, and since the decisions I make all by myself are inevitably the right ones, then why talk to anybody else?
Exactly. Fantastic. I love it. Any thoughts of things that maybe, again, we will assume positive intent. All the meetings that have ever been scheduled on the planet have had the intent of being good meetings, but kinds of meetings that you've been to where maybe that could have been done differently, things that don't necessarily need a meeting. Good. So if you're having a meeting, we'll talk about who should be there. But remember, you're using all of those people's time for that entire time. So it's like, it can be expensive in person power. All right. I'm not going to make you guess what I'm thinking. I think the other kinds of meetings that, as I have kind of continued to sit through meetings and watched my schedule just get packed and packed and packed and packed and packed. And I'm trying to think about, like, where can I not be and still be as effective, are the meetings that are just to update people. Right. So if it is just, there's nothing that the group, if you are the only one talking, why are we bothering, right? Do that some other way. So maybe update meetings. And then I guess the other thing, as I was doing some reading in preparation for this, is be careful or thoughtful about what you name a gathering. So if the purpose of the meeting is to build culture or to get to know people or to strengthen the team's kind of, togetherness, maybe it's called something other than the meeting. Maybe it's a social or a retreat or some other name. If it is a meeting simply to brainstorm because we're stuck on something, maybe you call it a brainstorm. And people come differently to that. Maybe it is an informational meeting, and that's just the way it has to be done. And I think I, sitting here in Idaho, go to town halls through the UW all the time. That's an informational, there's a little bit of back and forth, but it's largely an informational meeting. But that's a town hall. So I know I'm going to that to get information. I'm not going and expected to participate and bring new ideas and have a bunch of action items when I go. So I think, do you need a meeting, or can you do like Shom did? Could this be done in a couple of one-off discussions? Can it be done via email more efficiently? Or do you need to relabel it so that people kind of understand what they're going to get when they come to this block of time?
Well, one other slight variant, I think, on what we talked about is getting the group commitment to a plan. And sometimes that requires refining what had been the plan, but getting buy-in out of the group that this is what we're all agreeing to commit to and how we're going to move forward.
I love it. I love it. Tom, I'm going to use a COVID example again. I made it almost 18 minutes before saying the word out. You all knew what I was talking about, right? And all that this is. But I hear what I think, Tom, like as an example, right? When I needed to tell the residents, like, what we're going to have to do, you guys, is we're going to have to change the rotation schedule, and we're going to have to put in a second backup, right? Like, that was largely informational, but it was also to bring them together and say, we're in this, and help me tweak it a little bit, but the decision's already been made, but we're in it. And that was a meeting, but I didn't lead them to believe that we had a whole lot of choice. Yeah, great. Okay. All right. So sometimes a meeting's necessary. Sometimes they're even welcome. So I think the next thing on your pre-work is who should attend, right? So if Shom had received that email and it actually was somebody else who also needed to be helpful, so maybe now his meeting is 3 people rather than just the 2 of them. I think Tom had alluded to, right, sometimes we make decisions better together than separately. Maybe there's another profession that needs to be in the room, somebody with a vastly different perspective. The information that I was reading prior to this suggested that about 7 is about the tipping point spot, especially if you're going to have a meeting that truly is working as a meeting where everybody who's attending needs to have time to speak and submit their opinions. And I think 30 minutes, 50 minutes, 60 minutes, that's where sort of the 7 comes in. If you're going to have a more protracted meeting, you could maybe get more people than that, but 7 seems to be about the tipping point number. And then as you're thinking about the agenda, does everybody that you've invited need to be there for the whole meeting? Or do they not need to be in the meeting at all? Or can you adjust the agenda of the meeting so that everybody who is coming, it's pertinent to them for the entire time? I'm sure we've all sat in meetings where, you know, we were needed for 15 minutes of the meeting, and then the other rest of whatever time it was scheduled, we didn't need to be there from the get-go. Any other comments about size? The only other thing I can think of is if you have a larger group and it needs to be a larger group, if there are points in which brainstorming or idea generating needs to happen, perhaps breaking that larger group into a smaller group so that you're then at groups of 7 or less may be helpful to sort of gather everybody's, you know, the good input of everyone in the room, but be able to sort of manage it a little bit differently. All right, we're still in pre-work. Length of meeting. What's your favorite length of meeting? And you can't say 0.
30 minutes.
30 minutes.
Half hour.
Yeah, lots of votes for a half hour.
15 minutes less than what it was scheduled for.
Oh, okay. So Bill, you like the gift at the end.
Yeah, anchor and adjust. Right.
Okay, interesting. So I like that. So some people love the over, you know, tell them it's going to be an hour, and then actually in your head you've scheduled it for 45 minutes. And then there's some people, and I think some of the literature says, just schedule that meeting for 45 minutes. And I think the rationale that they are pushing is that if your attendees know they only have 30 minutes or 45 minutes, they may cut the junk out because Bill said it would be an hour. So I can talk about my new coffee cup that I got that was really great, because looks like the agenda's only got 45 minutes of stuff. So I'm just going to fill it up with things I really want to talk about. So shorten the meeting. If you can, it sounds like you guys like 30 minutes. I love it. The other benefits of 50-minute meetings or 20-minute meetings, can you guys give me some of those?
Well, I like those that are a little bit under the hour, right? Like 50 minutes, because then someone schedules another meeting after that, and then they actually have time for the break. And so it's just kinder than everyone rushing from the end of one into the other without any kind of chance to stretch their legs or fill their coffee.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's it, John. I think like in this world of back-to-back meetings, when are you supposed to urinate? We're all going to have Foley catheters.
I think there's a danger of super fast meetings, because then your calendar gets filled up with 20 and 30-minute meetings. And then you're like, oh my God, I have an entire day of 20. So like I think this requires some strategy around blocking calendars differently. And the other thing I'd say is like, it really depends on who's there and what you're trying to get accomplished. And if some of the goal is social support, efficiency is not always the main, goal. And so I guess I would say like 15 to 30-minute meetings, if they're just all about work, I don't know, that doesn't do it for me, frankly.
I love it. Right. So Molly, I think you said a lot of great things there. I'm just going to try to make sure that I was listening. One is, if part of the reason for your meeting is to build community, to decompress, to any of those things, then as you're scheduling the time and making the agenda, maybe it doesn't go exactly on the agenda, but you're at least building it in somehow. Because that's one of the goals. So you're being thoughtful about it. I love it. And then Molly, I don't know who does your calendar. The other thing I heard is that somehow your calendar could get stuck with a ton of 15-minute meetings. You need to like block that stuff off with personal space or something.
I've learned to have my calendar system put a 30-minute block after a meeting that requires work follow-up. That's very helpful. And it's actually for like all the work that comes out of the meeting kind of thing. But I didn't do that for a while, and it was like a sea of 30-minute meetings, and I would end the day like, I don't know, bedraggled.
Mo, can I ask Molly a follow-up question?
Yeah.
I I guess I like am a relationship person and love the idea of spending some amount of time in a meeting, having some social component. Do you explicitly like acknowledge that to other meeting planners? Like, oh, we're going to have a 40-minute meeting, but the first 10 minutes are going to be like a check-in, or does it happen more organically for you?
I don't think I've gotten this all figured out, Liz. I love seeing you. Hi, Liz. And we had a meeting this week for the college faculty. We had 2 smaller groups, and the people who were running the meetings huddled before and said, we are going to try to spend at least 30 minutes of our 2. It wasn't really, it was a meeting plus a bunch of work, brainstorming stuff. And we said, let's spend the first 30 minutes without agenda, just to hear what comes up and let folks share what's going on. And then let's try, but we didn't write that down on the agenda to say 30 minutes, checking in. Tell us about how you're feeling in the springtime or whatever. Because I think that starts to feel artificial too. And I don't know, maybe something else, like, I do think there's a balance between strict timelines and making space for what needs to come up or adjust. And I don't have the recipe exactly.
I've seen Trish Critic and Browning use a "what's your weather today" as a quick check-in, which is kind of nice. Gives people a chance, in a moment to convey how they're doing. But if there's something significant going on with them, they can comment a little bit more. So just I haven't introduced that into my meetings, but that in their hands seemed to work well for that check-in opportunity.
Love it. I think a lot of this too is knowing who your attendees are, right? If we were inviting the individuals from OHSU to meet with us about a merger of the UW OHSU system, right? Probably there's like some items that need to get done, and that needs to get done, right? But if it's something like this, which is not really a meeting, this is again more of a didactic educational time, right? If we didn't have time for Molly to say, "Hey Liz, good to see you," right, it would be mean. So I think some of it is building it in. That Liz, I use that first part on the agenda sometimes to, says like review of agenda or something like that. And then there's like a gross amount of time to do that, where it's all the things, or it's intro and there's a chunk of time, like Molly was saying, when those people huddled, right, to try to make sure that at least the people who are leading the meeting kind of know what's happening. I try not to telegraph too much. Like Molly was saying, Molly, you're down here on my screen, so that's what I'm like pointing at underneath my desk, maybe. Right, some people won't show up if they see that the first 20 minutes is fluffy stuff. And so I try not to project that, but also I try to be transparent about what we're going to try to get done for meetings that require that sort of thing. So, all right. Any other thoughts about length of meeting? I love the idea. I personally think we should never have meetings that run a complete hour, that we should always have John Cho's time to get, at least 10 minutes to get something to drink or otherwise. And Molly, I really love your idea of actually scheduling in specific time to get the after meeting work done, which we'll talk about also in the after meeting time.
Anybody
All right.
knows how to default Outlook to like a 50-minute meeting? Wouldn't that be smart? Like everything defaults to an hour. Anyway.
You can have that. It's a setting.
Is it?
It's a setting?
It's a setting. You can say how long. Yes, that's a setting.
Molly, can you share screen and share? This may be the most important thing we learned today, you guys. Do you know, can at some point, Molly, can you share screen?
This is informational item that is best sent by email.
Oh, thank you, Molly.
Used for this meeting.
Thank you, Molly. Wow, drop the mic. Molly, can you
I
send
will
it to
email,
me?
I will create something that I'll find the link and put it in chat or email it to you, Mo.
Yeah, awesome. Woo! I think I was just like picked up and slammed down. Love it, Molly. All right. Time of day. Does anybody know what I'm trying to get at with this? Liz, you're shaking your head. Tom's shaking his head.
Not at 7 a.m. or 6 p.m. unless it's absolutely critical decision-making time.
Fair.
Or PM on a Friday afternoon.
Fair. Okay, so I think we're getting some work-life balance. Any other thoughts about why the time? It's a little bit, guess what I'm thinking.
The hunger issue, like
Yeah, you don't want to
hungry
be
people get
hangry.
hangry. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to be hangry. Love that. I hadn't thought about the hangry. The
I
other
think
thing
there's
is,
evidence that people think better in the morning.
yeah, so the vast majority of us do. There are owls who think better at night. And if you could, put the meeting of all of your owls later in the day, they'd probably appreciate that. My wife is one of those. She's like, don't talk to me until about 6 p.m. I'll be sort of revving up by then. But yeah, otherwise, because the most of us we do better in the morning. If you have something sort of critical that really needs people to be thinking on their feet, morning meetings are probably better for better decision making. Plus, if you're on Molly's calendar, you don't want to be like the 16th 30-minute meeting of the day. All the good ideas are gone by then. All right, location, I think, speaks for itself. You guys just be thoughtful of what you're trying to get done. Again, if it's something where it's culture or team building, you might want to be in person in space, and saying in person is just like, it's like swearing nowadays. You can't even like say it without people cringing. So we won't dwell on location. And then, this is something I have learned the hard way. Hard way. All right, what is happening in the chat? We're all good? Oh, Molly, thanks. Woohoo! Your work is done today, Molly. You have made the world a better place. We are all happier people. All right. So pre-work, you guys, when I go to meetings, especially ones where decisions are going to have to be made, especially ones that involve decisions about the residency, which I care deeply about, I have like a no surprises rule. Like, my team members know, like, if you're going to drop a bomb at the meeting, please let me know beforehand, because we need to think through some things. Tanya is my administrative dyad buddy. And again, like the no surprises, right? So if we're going to go into a meeting and we need to brainstorm or make decisions, that's not the time to say, to sort out the details that would have been better sorted out by a one-on-one discussion before the larger group was there, right? So sometimes getting as many people on the same page before the meeting with one-on-one conversations is important. All right. Other thoughts about that? I think that's relatively self-explanatory. Okay, and then the idea of, is there something that you should send to the meeting attendees before the meeting? And this is a little bit tricky. I don't think I had seen a consent agenda until about 5 years ago. And then I like fell in love with it. Like the moment I saw it, because all of that updating information stuff was all in the pre-work for the meeting beforehand. And one could just say, yes, thank you, John. It was Apton Council. It was, it was. So there was a lot of like sharing and information that happened before the meeting, and everybody was technically on the same page with a consent agenda and materials beforehand. The tricky thing is, right, sometimes like the pre-work is so much work that you need to get out like a second paycheck just to get through the pre-work to go to the meeting to get things done. So I think at some large companies, they build time into the meeting for people to read sort of the pre-work. So if the concept is, I don't know, we're going to start a new collaboration with a hospital across town, and there's going to be a new contract or thing that we need to sort through. One way would be to send it in advance and say, you need to have read this before the meeting starts, come ready to discuss. Another way is to say, and maybe then that's a 30-minute meeting, or the other way is to say, okay, we're going to have a 45-minute meeting, and here's the information, but you don't have to read it in advance. And then the first part of the meeting is people actually reading the pre-work there while they're all together, which seems a little silly, but respects their time. And then there's discussion right after it. I think the other tricky spot is if it's really important that people have done the pre-work and they show up not having done the pre-work, but they're going to help make the decision, then it's like this, we're not all on the same page, and then you waste time trying to get on the same page. So I think you have to know a little bit about the people who are attending, and they need to, if you say they need to read it, they need to get it read beforehand. I'm going to pause for a moment because I think people have varying experiences with pre-work before a meeting. Any thoughts or tricks of the trade you want to share?
Well, this probably relates to what you're getting at with some of the stuff, which is that I think that I no longer assume that there is going to be a lot of work before the day of the next meeting, right? Like if there's homework to do, it often happens sort of like just before the next meeting or something like that, or right after the meeting, because there's sort of diminishing returns, I think, in terms of like if you have a monthly meeting or if you have a regularly scheduled meeting, to expect that people are going to be able to maintain the same focus immediately for a while afterwards.
Yep, I appreciate that, John. And I think there's some techniques in sort of the post-meeting time that can be used to help with that. So maybe when we get to that part, we can resurface that idea to see if anybody's figured out how to continue momentum. I think Shom is really good at this, the sort of post-meeting momentum thing. So maybe he can tell us some things. Other thoughts about pre-work? Getting people to do things before the meeting?
I'm kind of curious, something I'm thinking a lot about is like when there's projects that belong to somebody else, or there's like how to get people to take a lead on something, or to because it this is sort of a little bit of an aside, but like giving folks pre-work to do themselves that they're actually engaged in, rather than just that they're actually coming to the meeting to present something or coming to the meeting to lead a discussion around some topic that we're all working on. And so that there is some interest in doing pre-work or engagement. I think I have felt like people are not doing pre-work frequently, and it's because I'm not sure what it is. Either they're too time strapped, or they're just not feeling engaged in some, and so that's a question a little bit around, you know, how do you help people feel engaged with the material so that they come having done it, in order to make the meeting the most pithy and productive that it can be, sort of. Because I don't know how, if people like it when you bring them to a meeting and then you say, okay, get ready, get set, 15 minutes to just read, because some people have already done it maybe.
Fair. Yeah, I think you have to be clear about what the expectations are. Either way, Molly. Does anybody have a trick to help with Molly's situation about getting people to do pre-work? Bill?
Some of it might be what you're about to lead into, which is the meeting, and the post-work for the meeting begins the pre-work for the next meeting. So ideally, you know, it's actionable items and the owner for it. You take some type of even really crappy notes on the agenda, and you share that ahead of time so that, you know, I know, oh yeah, I'm supposed to present on this thing. And, you know, Mo knows, oh, that she's going to present on this. And even if that doesn't happen, like Mo's like, oh, I was busy on wards, didn't get that done, totally fine. We just kind of know what's going to happen. So that post-work leads to the pre-work, I think, but that requires somebody to take notes and share them in some way.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? I think those are great ideas, Bill. Molly, I don't know, you know, this is like, it's all sort of easy to sort of think about when you don't actually have the situation in front of you, but like, is that person who's not engaged, do they need to be at the meeting? Right? Do you cut them out? You're like, I don't know, maybe they don't know why they're there either, and maybe they don't need to be there. Maybe there's a different way. Is it part of the pre-work for you as the meeting leader, or me as the meeting leader, to like meet with somebody in advance and say, I'm really counting on you to do this. Are you in or are you out? You know, and this is what I need. And, but then you have to remember, it's right. It's like asking the medical student, go look that up. Right. And then never asking them what they found. Right. So you'd have to have the follow through as the leaders of the meeting to say, you know, Molly worked really hard on this in advance. Molly, what are you sort of thinking about X, Y, or Z? Right. It's so much work. Like we're like halfway through our hour even, and we haven't even gotten to the meeting yet. I'm exhausted. Right. Molly, you unmuted. Did you have other thoughts?
No, I think usually pre-work is reading such that you come prepared to be able to immediately brainstorm and engage collaboratively on something. And so I guess my question is, could I say to somebody, here is the question that we are going to be collaboratively engaging on. I want you to set aside 30 minutes before the meeting to really read through this so that you are hitting the ground running. It's mainly just about saying, what are we going to do? And why is it important to read this thing before anyway?
I love it. I love it, Molly. So in your pre-communication, you're going to tell them how much time you think it's going to take them to do this. You're going to get it to them in plenty of time so that they could make that time to get it done. You're going to phrase your meeting agenda maybe in the form of questions, right? Here's the question we need to answer so they know where you're going. I love that. Show Molly for giving this talk. Next go around. All right. Okay, let's see where we're at. Okay, and then we're going to talk about the agenda. And then, of course, you have to send this information to the people in advance. And I am classic 10 minutes before the meeting, you get the agenda. That is not how to do it. It's easy to say how to run a meeting effectively. It's harder to actually do it. So send the pre-work. All right, so agendas. So I love what Molly has already added to the agenda, which is in the attachments or the pre-work or whatever. She's going to put this inspiring statement that tells you how much time it's going to take you to do it. And she's going to tell you to come ready. Like, I want to come to Molly's meeting and be ready. I don't even know what she wants me to talk about yet, but whatever it is, I'll do the pre-work. As long as you don't put me on the wards the same day, Molly. It's too hard that way. All right. But name the meeting, put some sort of purpose statement or inspirational thingamabobber, or what are we really going to do, right? This is a brainstorming meeting about that, whatever we were going to talk about, right? So label it, make the purpose clear. Of course, they need to know when to show up and where to be, and then anything to attach. And then I think many of you have hit on the agenda itself. Try to have an amount of time for a topic that'll help people as they're thinking like, okay, is now the time again for me to talk about my new mug because we're so far down the agenda, we've got time left over, or do I really need to be crisp because the leaders got somewhere else that we're going? Okay, the topic, help your topic label help you get what you need to do done. So Molly says make it a question, right? Does the residency expand from 10 to 12 categorical residents per year? That is the topic. We're going to spend 30 minutes talking about it. And the person responsible is Moe. And there we go, right? And maybe I've met with Liz and she knows what her part's going to be, and Bill knows what his part's going to be. Maybe that's on the agenda. There's some subsets, that sort of thing. But being clear about what we want to do, the time we're going to want to spend, and then having some wrap up time set up in the meeting or a date of a next meeting, those sorts of things. We'll talk about the wrap up. Any other tricks that you guys can think of the actual like physical agenda that people might have with them that you found helpful? John?
Yeah, so just a comment first, which is that the not having the agenda is like the worst thing for a meeting ever, because it reflects, I think, poorly on sort of the pre-work, right? The planning and all that. I do a similar thing with my agendas. I actually have an additional column that I add, a tab that has, that lists the action. And so I literally say information, discussion, or decision. And so I'm saying, you know, this point in the agenda, we are going to make a decision. This point in the agenda, it's just for information, or this is just for discussion. And I don't know that it's strictly necessary, but I think that calling it out like that, I think really, as we go through the agenda and we haven't done those things, then we can all look at it and say, hey, we haven't made a decision, and we were supposed to make a decision at this point in the agenda.
Love it. Love it. Thanks, John. Any other ideas about the physical agenda? Okay. All right. Whew, we're finally getting to the meeting. Thank goodness. We spent like 16 months planning it. All right. We mentioned before sort of setup. So Shom, for example, for this discussion, he sent me an email a week or a couple of days ago and said, Mo, do you need anything? I'm going to be on the Zoom 15 minutes early. He was there 15 minutes early. And we talked about other things and didn't make sure that I could share screen, but we had a good time chatting. But he did his like, the meeting's going to happen and I'm going to do the room setup and other things ahead of time. So I think that's self-explanatory, but oftentimes, especially if you're scheduled yourself, it's sort of back to back to back, you don't have time to do those sorts of things. It gets tricky. All right, start on time. Everybody knows that. As soon as you don't start on time, the next meeting with the same group of people, they show up 5 minutes later, and then you don't start on time, then it's 10 minutes later, and then your 30-minute meeting is all lost because nobody was there. And then at the very beginning, make sure that you state purpose again, because you want everybody to be online. And if you've got John's agenda in front of you, you're going to call out the action item column, and you're going to say, remember, these are the things we're going to get done today, you guys. So here we go. And then I think there's lots of ways to sort of get started. I think if you have a group that you're concerned about unruliness, or there's going to be confrontation or other sorts of things, I think it's helpful to take time to lay out clear rules of conduct. I have some various ones on this slide that you could sort of consider. We did a little bit of that here today. I don't think that was necessary because we're all like people who know each other and respectful and those sorts of things, and not that other people who aren't respectful or don't know each other can't do this. But right, if I didn't know some of you, this would be more formal potentially, and we might need to be more clear, like, is Mo okay being interrupted? What do I do if this gets offline? And it's always, I think, easier to tell people they're out of line if you've told them what in line is beforehand. Does that seem fair? So this is for the person who brings their own agenda to your meeting, and you're like, time out, or somebody else at the meeting says, time out. How is that related to how we're going to make a decision about this item? Right? And then it's like, oh yeah, that's right, that was in the ground rules. We weren't going to talk about off-topic things today. I think, and this is one of the Harvard Business Review, that like 15 gazillion volume series that they have, where it tells you everything you need to know to be a good leader and otherwise. I think it's Bob Frisch, and hold on a sec while I look and give proper credit to the other author whose name I'm forgetting, and Carrie Green, in this book talk about using the word jellyfish. So you use jellyfish kind of as something is gone off the rails in the meeting, and somebody says jellyfish, and then it's like, oh yes, we're either not paying attention to the time, or somebody's talking over top of somebody else, or somebody's brought their own agenda that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. And then it's just sort of like apparently like a fun and silly thing to say. And apparently we're not talking about jellyfish very often. So it doesn't, like, the agenda is not, what do we do about the jellyfish? So that everybody's like, anyway, you get what I'm saying. Now I'm kind of out of control myself, jellyfish. But again, these are sorts of things you can plan in advance. And sometimes you'll know your audience enough to know which of these rules are probably the most pertinent. Fair? I love bring solutions, not complaints. Liz is writing that down. It's not directed at you, Liz. You usually come with solutions. All right. Any other ideas of ground rules that you guys have used that have been helpful for you? Okay. All right, you guys have talked about much of this while we were talking about the pre-work. We kind of got into the meeting. So consider some sort of introductory activity or introductions. Molly talked a bit about this. I think Tom talked about what Anne and Trish have done. I call at my leadership meeting every week, I call it the moments for fits of joy. So people share that somebody's gotten married, or, those sorts of things. And so there's small fits of joy. They saw a medical student do a thoracentesis perfectly, and it was just a thing of beauty. And then we all start crying, and then we're so happy when we get started that we can hardly contain ourselves. And then I think some of you also mentioned you have to be a little bit careful to not make these too sappy, soupy, or to alienate some people at your meeting who are not that kind of person. So be thoughtful about that. All right, I consider a note taker. Sometimes taking the most unruly person and making them the note taker divides their brain enough that they get slowed down and you can use it doubly to your advantage. It's like handing the marker to the resident who won't stop talking and having them write on the whiteboard. So consider that. It's hard to be the leader of the meeting and to take the notes at the same time, I think, is the other thing. And when you get to the end of the meeting, you're trying to summarize and that sort of thing, it can be difficult to remember all the good things that have been decided. All right, the other thing, things for in the meetings, I threw this one in. I didn't find it other places, but I think it's really important to give people recognition in the meeting, not like artificial fluffy ones where we're gonna now we're going to talk about all the awards that the people in the meeting have now received. But right, when Leslie comes up with a good idea, or Leslie had a good idea in the pre-work of the meeting, right? When that idea is brought up, that is Leslie's idea. And even if you're the person presenting the idea or leading about the, it's like, and Leslie had this great idea. Right now, Leslie's paying attention because Moe paid attention to Leslie, and it's so wonderful. And you're kind of like tricking them into doing, Leslie, I wouldn't do that to you. But you know, like we all, our own favorite word is our own name. So just like give people credit where credit's due. All right, and then there's this magical orchestration of group discussion. It's taking the person who you know has the idea and is going to be okay with you cold calling on them and saying, Kamala, we haven't heard from you yet, but I value your opinion about this. Can you share your thoughts on, you know, how we're managing the time in this meeting or whatever the deal is, right? So reaching out to the people who maybe aren't speaking, saying, you know, thank you, Molly, for sharing all of that experience. I'm wondering what Bill has to say, you know, those sorts of things. You get what I'm saying. All right. And then the all important ending with a summary and clear action items. I think this is easy to say, harder to do, right? We have decided that John will, by this date, do the following, right? We have decided that Moe and Leslie together will work and do this by this date, right? Liz will do X, and we will all reconvene at this time and date again. We will be sure to invite Tom at a time when he can be here for the whole time, because we needed his input, and we'll need it again next, right? You know, so it's all of those summary things. And then the people who talk about this, and Shom has taught me this too, but it is so painful. It is so painful, right? But if these are people you're going to meet with again and again and again, you leave time at least the first couple of times while you're trying to find your groove, and you say, okay, guys, let's take a time. It just is so painful to me, but it's so important. And you say, okay, we just had a meeting. What went well? What didn't go well? And how are we going to work together as a group the next go around when we meet so that this goes better, right? You're going to say, John's going to say, Moe, you got to send the agenda more than 10 minutes beforehand. And I'll say, John, I don't know how to do that. Do you think there's somebody else on the team who could help do that better? Because I'm not going to be able to make it, right? So it's figuring out how we're going to do things better the next time. All right, we're going to skip the whiteboard because nobody's seen one for a while and I didn't give myself enough time. That's my own feedback. All right, and then the people who write about doing meetings say within the next 2 to 3 hours after finishing the meeting. So if you've ended the meeting early, hopefully you can get this done before your next meeting so you don't have to worry about it, right? You send a brief summary, especially the action items with the responsible individual and the timeline. And then if you're really good at this, you put a reminder somewhere where you're going to find it again, or you make the email right then that's going to be the reminder that you time to have sent out in a week or 2 weeks. And it says, Moe, thank you again for volunteering at the last meeting to make sure that you had provided this. Just checking in to see if you're on track for the deadline that is X. Right? That's like higher level stuff. I'm never going to get there. But boy, that really helps. Okay. And then you got to follow through. I think we have like a minute and a half or 6 minutes for other